Have you ever thought that maybe your strength isn't really strength at all? That this self-control everyone admires, this silence you've learned to maintain, and this posture of someone who endures everything might just be sophisticated ways of hiding a pain that still lives inside you? The truth is, there's a kind of strength the world applauds, but it corrodes you from the inside. A strength built in the absence of comfort, when the only option was survival, and when you had no other choice, you learned to turn emotional pain into armour. But what if that armour over time became a prison? There's something almost no one notices about this. Not all strength is born from overcoming. Some arise from the sheer need not to fall apart. And the more you're praised for being a fortress, the lonelier you feel within it. Because deep down, the wounded child you once were is still waiting to be held. In this video, we're not going to talk about weakness. We're going to talk about courage. The courage to look at yourself, to face what was forgotten, what was buried in the name of appearing okay. Maybe no one has ever told you this before, but not every burden needs to be carried alone. And that's what we need to talk about, because your strength might be hiding something much deeper than you realise. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. There is a kind of strength that isn't born from choice, but from necessity. It's shaped in the silence of the nights when no one came, in the tears swallowed back in childhood, when comfort never came. It's a strength that didn't blossom, it defended itself. And that's why, even though it looks strong on the outside, inside, it carries invisible cracks. Childhood has a subtle way of marking us with absence. All it takes is a harsh word at the wrong moment, a hug that never came, a look that asked for too much, and there, in that small instant, something in us breaks. But since no one sees it, we go on. We learn that feeling is dangerous, and showing pain is a threat. Time passes, and that idea becomes a rule. Rules we didn't choose, but inherited. You learn to wear the mask of feminine strength, the one who handles everything, who cradles the world, who never breaks. But behind the firm smile lives an ancestral exhaustion, a silent depletion from having to be an adult too soon. This strength is admired and applauded, but those who carry it know it's not light. It's the kind of strength that says, "I'm fine," while falling apart inside. It's the automatic "I've got this," even when your heart is screaming for help. And every time you ignore that scream, a piece of your essence slips further away. What few understand is that this strength isn't a virtue, it's a mechanism, a shield born from lack, from repressed emotional pain, from the fear of being left behind. Because when comfort fails, the body learns to protect itself. And protection many times means hardening not to feel, hardening to keep going. But this armour doesn't protect you from everything. It distances you. It pulls you away from real connections, from deep bonds, from relationships where you could simply exist. And the cruelest part is, the stronger you appear, the less people realise you need to be cared for. The pain goes unnoticed by others, and by yourself too, until one day it explodes, in the form of a crisis, anxiety, or an emptiness you can't explain. The strength built in pain teaches you to stay silent when you should ask, to keep going when your body wants to stop, to care for everyone except yourself. And on the outside, everything works, but on the inside, there's no soul. There's no safe space where you can finally be held, without having to prove anything. Deep down, this strength doesn't represent you. It was necessary once, but today maybe it's stopping you from feeling yourself, your real needs, your simplest desires. And maybe the first step is to look at this armour with compassion, to understand that it saved you, but it has already served its purpose. And that brings us to something even deeper. No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung. Because behind this strength there's an even more silent burden, the weight of never asking for help. There are people who've learned to carry the world without ever saying a word. They walk among us, smiling, solving, caring. But inside them, there's a silent scream, the cry for help that never came out. And the most devastating part is that often they don't even know how heavy it all is, because the habit of not asking for help becomes entangled with identity. This weight doesn't come from what's carried, but from the silence around what is felt. It's the burden of forced self-sufficiency, the belief that asking for something is the same as being weak. And so we keep managing everything, while drifting away from ourselves. It's not pride, it's protection. It's not a choice. It's conditioning. Because at some point in childhood, asking meant rejection. Feminine strength from early on was trained to be a pillar. Be strong, hang in there, don't cry now. Small phrases that teach big sacrifices. And when you hear them too many times, you start to believe your worth lies in not needing anyone. But no one should have to carry their soul in silence. No one should need to be strong all the time. Emotional pain builds up, not from lack of solution, but from lack of sharing. And the worst part is, the more capable you seem, the less people notice that you need help. They don't ask, don't comfort, don't listen. And you who once tried to ask, now remain completely silent, because you've already learned that vulnerability rarely finds a safe place. But there's one detail that changes everything. No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Carl Jung. The silence you keep today may be suffocating your deepest truth. Maybe it's time to stop saving the world and start saving yourself. Because there is more courage in asking for help than in continuing to pretend that everything is okay. Asking for help doesn't diminish you. It reveals you. It reveals the humanity behind your strength, the beauty found in emotional honesty. And even if it feels threatening, that's where healing begins. Because when you allow yourself to be truly seen, something inside you finally settles. You no longer have to carry it all alone. To hold yourself is also to learn how to be held. It's making space for others to arrive, not as saviors, but as presence. And in that presence, you may discover that your pain doesn't need to live in the dark anymore. It can be shared, softened, understood. And little by little, the weight becomes a path. And in the end, what we want most is exactly this: to be seen, to be heard, to be loved even when we're in pieces. And maybe it all starts with the courage to say, I need. Because no one was born to be an island, and true comfort begins when we make space to be helped. You are what you do with what was done to you. Carl Jung. Vulnerability is like a rusty door that life insists on keeping shut. It creaks as it opens, startles with its sound, and reveals what we've spent years trying to hide. But it's precisely there, in that space we avoid so carefully, that healing begins to breathe. There is no healing without exposure to light. And even if the world tells us otherwise, allowing yourself to feel is the deepest act of strength. Most of us grew up believing that vulnerability is weakness, that crying is shameful, that showing pain is being fragile, that asking to be held is immaturity. But this is nothing more than an old conditioning. A reflection of childhood, where showing pain was often met with silence, reprimand, or contempt. And so we learned to put on the armour, even when it hurts. But what few realise is that vulnerability doesn't break us. It reveals us. It's in the moment we fall apart that we truly find ourselves. It's through the crack that the light enters. And every time you allow someone to witness your emotional pain without filters, something within you begins to align. Because being vulnerable is embracing your humanity and stopping the fight against it. Feminine strength, so often romanticized for its resilience, is also the one that demands the most of itself. It's the one that feels guilty for feeling, that hides for fear of rejection, that would rather stay silent than be a burden. But what this strength needs to learn is that feeling is not losing yourself. It's finding yourself again. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you teach others how to truly love you, not out of convenience but out of connection. Vulnerability is not uncontrolled exposure. It's choosing to be authentic, even knowing the risks. It's having the courage to say, "I'm not okay," even when the world expects otherwise. And by doing so, you break the cycle of loneliness, open the path to being held, and dissolve fear. You begin to heal, not by hiding, but by revealing yourself. What few understand is that healing doesn't come from strength. It comes from surrender. It comes from allowing yourself to fall into the arms of your own soul, without judgment. It's in that space that you reconnect with the little girl who had to be too strong for too long. And you can finally say to her, "Now I'm here for you." That's the kind of comfort that transforms. And when that happens, something magical emerges. Peace. Not the peace of no pain, but the peace of knowing you no longer have to fight against yourself. You begin to embrace yourself with the same tenderness you've always offered to the world. And you realize that real strength isn't in resistance, but in allowing yourself to be whole, with both light and shadow. That brings us to something even deeper. He who looks outside dreams, but he who looks inside awakens. Carl Jung. Because when we allow ourselves to feel, we begin to see how strength can subtly become self-abandonment. There comes a moment when strength, once a shield, becomes a prison. It's when you no longer know the difference between what you truly want and what you've merely learned to endure. You get so used to being strong that you forget what it's like to be held. And without realizing it, you begin to abandon yourself. Not because you want to, but because you believe you have to. This self-abandonment doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle. It starts when you stop honouring your own desires just to please others. When you silence your emotional pain to keep the peace. When you accept crumbs of love because you've learnt that asking for more is too much. And little by little you begin to disappear within your own life. Feminine strength, when unbalanced, turns into emotional invisibility. You become the one everyone admires, but no one truly hears. The one who fixes, who organises, cares, but never receives. And it hurts. It hurts because deep down, you know you're living for others, while you keep putting yourself last. Childhood teaches us this pattern more than we realise. That little girl who learned to adapt in order to be loved, who noticed that her needs were inconvenient, who shaped herself to avoid rejection. She still lives inside you. And every time you silence yourself, it's her you're silencing. What few people understand is that being strong all the time comes at a high cost, a price paid in loneliness, exhaustion, disconnection. And the cruelest part is that the more you abandon yourself, the more others demand from you. Because you've taught the world that you can handle everything, and now no one even thinks to ask if you need anything. But there's a detail that changes everything. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Carl Jung. Self-abandonment is not a destiny. It's a cycle, and cycles can be broken. It takes just one choice, the choice to return to yourself. Returning to yourself means looking inward and asking, who am I taking care of, while forgetting myself? It's having the courage to admit that you're tired, that you need to stop, to breathe, to feel. And that's not selfish, it's necessary, because no one blossoms in the desert of emotional neglect. When you start listening to yourself, everything changes. Decisions stop being obligations and become acts of connection. You move, not to please, but to honour yourself. And this shift, though subtle, is revolutionary. It's what transforms strength into presence. And this brings us to something even deeper. The soul needs shelter, just as the body needs a home. Carl Jung. Because the moment you reconnect with yourself, you begin to feel the lightness of being held by your own presence. There is a kind of lightness that doesn't come from the outside. It's born the moment you finally decide to come home. Not the home with walls and windows, but the one that lives inside your chest. The place where you allow yourself to exist without pressure. Where your pain is not shameful, but a story. To be held by yourself is the deepest form of love. It's in that internal space where silence stops hurting and starts to heal. You stop waiting for someone to save you and instead listen to yourself with tenderness. You no longer need to justify or prove anything. You simply accept yourself exactly as you are, with your strength and with your fragility. Because now both are welcome. Feminine strength, when guided by self-compassion, becomes presence. A presence that is firm yet gentle. No longer the one who endures everything, but the one who chooses what's worth carrying. And that changes everything. You begin to say no without guilt, to rest without feeling weak, to prioritize yourself without feeling selfish. To be held by yourself is to understand that emotional pain no longer needs to be exiled. It can be heard, embraced, and redefined. You are no longer the one who pretends to be okay just to keep everything from falling apart. Now you are the one who holds yourself, even when everything seems to be collapsing. And in that self-embrace, you find peace. It's not about isolating yourself from the world. It's about no longer abandoning yourself in it. About walking alongside others, but without forgetting who you are. Because the woman who learns to hold herself no longer accepts crumbs of love. She is nourished by her own affection and shares what overflows. This lightness does not mean the absence of challenges. It means the freedom to no longer have to betray yourself in order to face them. You become whole, and when you are whole, you don't need anyone to complete you. What comes will be a choice, not a necessity. And the most beautiful part is that in holding yourself, you teach the world how to be loved by you, not through the mask of strength, but through the truth of your soul. And that is revolutionary, because when a woman returns to herself, she heals not only her own story, but the stories of so many who came before her, and of those who are yet to come. And then, everything makes sense. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Carl Jung. But are we ready to accept that? And then, everything makes sense. The strength you carry was never the problem. The problem was believing you had to use it all the time. It was thinking that being strong meant never feeling, never falling, never asking. But now something is revealed. True strength isn't in resisting. It's in allowing yourself to be whole. Because in the silence of your nights, in the exhaustion no one sees, there is a soul not asking for more resilience, but for gentleness. A gentleness that asks for no achievement, no performance, just presence, just you, fully. Feminine strength no longer needs to prove its worth. It already has. In every single day you silenced your pain to love, to serve, to keep going. But now maybe it's time to change the gesture, to turn the same strength that kept you standing into the ground where you finally rest. Because that too is love. In the end, emotional pain doesn't want control. It wants space. It wants to be seen, felt, held, without judgment. And when you offer that to yourself, healing begins, not as a miracle, but as a reunion. And that reunion transforms everything. You stop searching out there for what already lives within. You stop wanting to be invincible and start longing to be true. And in that longing, you find freedom. The freedom to be vulnerable without falling apart. The freedom to be yourself. In the end, the answer was always there. In the forgotten childhood. In the held back tears. In the longing to be held and never left behind again. But are we ready to accept that? Your strength is hiding a pain that just needs to be held. Carl Jung. If you've made it this far, maybe something inside you was touched. Maybe you realise that this strength everyone admires hides a story few truly know, and that story deserves more than silence. It deserves to be held, understood, and finally set free. The truth is, you don't have to carry it all alone anymore. You have the right to rest, to feel without guilt, to pause without explanation, to be vulnerable without fearing you won't be loved. This journey is not about letting go of strength, but about rediscovering what strength really means. Strength is not resisting pain. It's having the courage to look at it with tenderness. It's knowing that being held doesn't weaken you. It heals you. Now is the time to take the first step. Start applying these ideas today, and then tell me in the comments how the experience was. Your story might inspire other women who also carry their pain in silence. Let's rebuild together what it means to be strong, with presence, with truth, with love. Tell me here, which part of this reflection resonated most with you? Or, what are you now willing to hold in yourself from this moment on? Your presence and your sharing make this journey even richer. And if you want to go even deeper into this topic, I'm leaving another video up here that can add real value to your path. I'll see you in the next video.